Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Dan.
And I'm Sam.
In this episode, we're starting a brand new adventure with S.A. Chakraborty's City of Brass. We begin our story in 18th century Cairo, occupied by Napoleonic forces. But prepare to be magicked away on a flying carpet as we encounter Djinn, ghouls, and birds the size of large buildings on our journey to the mystical city of Daevabad. It's a whole new world, so let's go and explore it. All right, new book. New episode.
And our first fantasy book that's even ever so slightly set in the real world.
The recognisable... Real world. Yeah, 19th century occupied Cairo.
But is it where it's actually set?
Here's a good question.
Yeah, and I think this brings us on to new book, new blurb.
Yeah.
Because... you know, your intro kind of ties in a little bit, but yours perhaps it gives a bit more away than what this blurb does. So, there you go. Here's the blurb.
In the markets of 18th century Cairo, thieves, tricksters, con artists, and outcasts eke out a living, swindling rich nobles and foreign invaders alike. But alongside this new world, the old stories linger. Tales of Djinn and spirits, of cities hidden among the swirling sands of the desert, full of enchantment, desire, and riches, where magic pours down every street, hanging in the air like dust. Many wish their lives could be filled with wonder, but not Nahri. She knows the trade she uses to get by are just tricks and sleights of hand. There's nothing magical about her. She only wishes to one day leave Cairo. But as the saying goes, be careful what you wish for.
Now, arguably, a bit of a misleading blurb, but also a very intriguing one, because she's in Cairo for what? The first chapter?
Yeah.
And then she's out of there.
That arguably paints more of a picture of Cairo in the blurb than we get in the first chapter as well, because we don't really get into other tricksters and thieves. Yeah. We're very much focused on Nahri's personal experience.
And also, I feel like Daevabad's more of a main city. And also in this first paragraph, thieves, tricksters, con artists, and outcasts eke out a living. They're all plurals. All of those are just describing Nahri.
She's carrying a lot of weight for the thieves, con artists, trickster community.
Yeah, she's the only one in all of Cairo. But like, you know, I get it. She's part of that tapestry, but she's the only one we meet in Cairo before we go off to Daevabad and the desert.
And the other thing there is that it says that she doesn't think she's magical at all, but she does know that she has these abilities to sense people's illnesses.
It becomes almost a bit like the unreliable narrator, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because she's in denial about her powers being magical, because she doesn't believe in Djinn. So she's potentially, just in denial about what she truly is, because her skeptical medical mind doesn't want to believe it. But I think we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. Do you want to do a bit of a recap?
A bit of one. Oh, I said that last time.
So we should start. Obviously, you should have read up to the end of chapter 9. So I guess this could be quite a big recap.
I'll delay no more and get on with it. Nahri is an outcast in 19th century Cairo, pretending to be a mystic while secretly using her real magical abilities. Healing, detecting illness, and understanding languages. She dreams of studying medicine in Istanbul, but lacks the means or opportunity as a woman. During a zar, an exorcism ritual, she chants in her mysterious native tongue to enhance the mysticism. This triggers strange events. The girl she's exorcising, Basima, becomes unnaturally still, and a voice in Nahri's head demands, "Who are you?" Disturbed, Nahri leaves, but Basima continues to watch her. While walking home through the main necropolis of Cairo, Nahri notices Basima following her. Basima behaves oddly, cryptically referencing Nahri looking like that witch before becoming terrified of a gathering storm. Suddenly, a fiery Djinn appears, furious at being summoned. Nahri flees, but he chases her, demanding to know how she can speak Devasti, which turns up in the name of her native language. Their confrontation is interrupted when Basima reappears. She is revealed to be possessed by an Ifrit. She declares Naru a Banu Nahida, a supposedly extinct lineage, and summons ghouls to attack her and the Djinn. The Djinn kills Basima and tells Nahri to retrieve a rug from a tomb to escape. While searching, Nahri is attacked by ghouls and blacks out, waking, healed, at a desert oasis. The Djinn questions Nahri, learning more about her powers but sharing little in return. A bird-like creature called a Peri, named Kazor, arrives and advises the Djinn, whose name he reveals to be Dara, to escort Nahri to the city of Daevabad. They depart on a flying carpet. We then jump to the perspective of Prince Alizaid al-Khatani within the city of Daevabad, a member of the ruling Deva family. He covertly meets Anas Bat, a Shafit sheikh. A Shafit is half Djinn, half human, who is fighting for Shafit rights within the city. Prince Ali is funding his work secretly with donations from his own private treasury. However, Ali is threatening to cut off his funding because he is concerned Anas and his people are using his money to buy weapons to attack his father's soldiers. Anas denies this, but Ali demands to see how his money is being sent. As a result, that night, Ali meets with Anas and a shape-shifting Shafit called Hanno. The three of them infiltrate the Deva district in disguise. They enter a rough-looking tavern and meet a man called Turan, who is running a child smuggling operation. A young Shafit girl, kept as a slave, is pushed into the room carrying drinks. Turan then enters with a Shafit baby, who could pass as a full Djinn due to their pointed ears and glowing skin. Hanu has shapeshifted into an Agni Vanshi, a kind of Djinn, to pretend to be a prospective buyer who wants to pass the baby off as his own pure-blood child. Ali is shocked to realise what is going on and offers a ring to buy the girl to save her as well. Turan, responding to this, suddenly excuses himself and the three of them realise they've been rumbled. The ring was far too expensive to buy the girl and Turan must have realised something wasn't right. The guards have been called and the place is being raided. Anas sacrifices himself to divert attention and is arrested, allowing Ali and Hanno to escape with the baby and the girl while being pursued by the guards. Nahri and Dara, meanwhile, land their carpet in the ruins of a city called Hierapolis. Dara once knew this place centuries ago, and they need to rest there because he needs to use more magic to cross the Euphrates. Nahri senses that Dara has a great fear of water, but is unsure why. Nahri waits for Dara to fall asleep before attempting to escape, but before she leaves, she intends to steal a giant emerald ring Dara is wearing. However, as she touches it, her mind is flooded with visions of Dara's violent and troubled past as a Djinn slave. Her mind is wrenched back to the world as Dara pries her hand from the ring. He is in shock and having a panic attack, but then the ground begins to rumble and they realise more ghouls are coming. They escape on the flying carpet, and once free, Dara tells Nahri more about the origins of Deva and Ifrit, how they were formless beings who would toy with humans until a human named Suleiman cursed the Deva with physical forms. But there were those who refused to bow to Suleiman's judgment, the Ifrit, who he bound in formless shape. They have gone mad over the millennia, hate their Deva brethren, and consider humanity a parasite. Ali, having made it back safely from the Deva district without any suspicion about his involvement, has to attend the public execution of Anas. He joins up with his elder brother, the Crown Prince Muntadir. The execution itself is horrendous, as Anas is crushed to death by a creature called a Karkadan. After this, Ali follows his father, Ghassan, to the palace, a place Ali strongly dislikes. Built by the Nahid Devas, it is seemingly haunted and has always made life difficult for the Khatanis ever since they occupied it. Ghassan demands that the Shafit rebellion be stamped out within the city. Ghassan and his vizier, Kaveh, suspect the Shafits have a secret wealthy patron. Wajed, the Qaid, head of Ghassan's guard, opens a crate and reveals the weapons the Shafit have been buying with Ali's funds. Ali is shocked to see this. Ghassan announces that Wajed must leave to investigate, and Ali will be Qaid in his absence. Ghassan asks everyone to leave except Ali. Once alone, Ghassan interrogates his son on his views about Shafit rights. Ali reluctantly tells him the truth and they discuss the importance of having political flexibility. At the end of the conversation, Ghassan says Ali must move to the palace to be closer to court. We then rejoin Nahri and Dara on their journey. Dara tells Nahri more about the history of the Deva. Suleiman's curse had allowed the Deva to breed with humans, creating Shafit. The proliferation got out of hand and laws were put in place demanding segregation between humans and Deva. As the Deva continued to ignore it, the ruling Nahid dynasty enforced the laws more harshly. A breaking point came when the Gaziri, who were the closest to humans and had adopted the Islamic religion, rose up against the Nahid and deposed them. Nahri says that she herself is proof of Nahid hypocrisy. She and Dara argue and he stalks off into the night. Back in Daevabad, Ali is attending his father's court for the first time. It runs for hours as his father deals with countless petitioners. Ali quickly realises that he is out of his depth and asks the secretary he is speaking to if he would work for him. The man agrees and introduces himself as Rashid Ben Salk. Retiring to his room, Ali discovers that Kaveh has hired 2 courtesans and sent them to his room. Ali is flustered, but is saved by the arrival of his sister Zainab and his brother Muntadir. They shoo the women away and tell Ali this was a trap set by Kaveh, who wanted Ali to get upset and cause a scene, with the goal of having Ali removed from court. Muntadir explains that Kaveh is worried that Ali's religious zealotry and hatred of the Deva will only lead to Kaveh's people suffering. Back with Dara and Nahri, after apologising to each other, they set off on horseback, but are attacked by a ruch, a huge bird the size of a small building. Dara, sensing this is the only way to defeat it, allows himself to be eaten, and then hacks his way from the inside of the ruch. He emerges alive but seems to be dying. Despite having protested against Nahri trying to heal him with her touch, she does it anyway. As she does so, she experiences more visions, including him being drowned. She becomes overwhelmed and passes out. Dara revives her, Nahri's magic having restored him. Nahri spots some of her possessions on the rook, and they realise that someone had given them to the bird to hunt her. They deduced it must have been Khazor, as only Peris can command rooks to do their bidding. They must hurry to Daevabad as quickly as they can, before they are attacked again.
Whoa.
And now, Dan, before off-pod, you mentioned that you were struggling to feel something about this book. I get the sense. So tell me. We had to cut my recap heavily before I could read that, and even that felt long. So with so much going on, why did you feel that way?
So, and I wouldn't want it to be misinterpreted that I'm not enjoying it, because I genuinely am. I'm finding it really easy to read along and enjoy the development. I think in some ways it's like a positive thing in my head. Like, it feels like they're doing the work to build the world that we're in and the politics and and what's going on. And sometimes when you're in the early stages of a book and it still feels, even though actually on reflection we've had lots of bits of action, it feels like we're still in the very early stages of a book where you're still kind of waiting to see how things are going to start to interact with each other. I found myself struggling to have kind of super strong opinions on anything. I was just kind of more in a headspace of, let's just carry on listening and enjoying it while it goes. So it's certainly not a criticism. It's just more of a, oh my God, I do a podcast on books and I don't know what I'm going to say.
Well, I want to start with the fact that we're in what essentially, like I mentioned before the recap, the blurb is almost trying to say it's set within our world, but it feels almost entirely removed. We have Nahri as a character who is in a vaguely relatable real world, albeit late 18th century, and suddenly she's pulled out of that. And I think, and pushed into this world that is entirely alien and might as well be a fantasy world. It might as well be a parallel dimension because it seems to exist beyond a human sight, almost. The Djinn can't be seen and by normal people.
And I guess we have to maybe give it time to see whether it does link back into our world, because we've got two very clear kind of geographic reference points in terms of Cairo and the Euphrates, in which would be modern day Iraq. There seems to be a deliberate attempt to build in these anchor points in our world, and it'll be interesting to see whether, we're clearly heading towards Daevabad. Ali's there, Nahri and Dara are heading there.
Yeah.
Like they're clearly going to converge on that point. Whether the story then comes back out and then starts to interact more with what's going on in the non-Djinn, non-magical world would be really interesting.
But I think it's also interesting about the perspective of the I love a good fantasy map. And this one, of course, is very recognizable geography. And it does an interesting point of, if I hold it up to the camera here, you can see that you've got Cairo, Hierapolis, and all the other cities listed are Djinn, Deva cities. So it feels like in terms of where the story's headed, it's not going to feature much in terms of human civilization unless they return to Cairo.
Yeah.
And it shows how Deva focused the world that we're inhabiting is going to be.
Yeah. I'm trying to sort of establish in my head whether it's totally pointless to establish the real world before just disregarding it after one chapter.
Well, and also just making it the center of the blurb. Like,
but like, just the fact that, I don't know, there's something about connecting readers to something that they recognize, isn't there? Like, you have to take less of a leap, perhaps, in terms of kind of building this world inside your head when you're reading the book.
Yeah. And also by placing the cities on, a world map, it builds the world on top of the one we know.
Yeah.
Shows what's hidden beyond the veil of, of mortal vision. But I also think that Nahri's a very interesting character because she feels out of time as well as being ripped out of her mortal space, because she is someone who is almost like a walking diagnostic department. She has this approach to medicine that is outside of her own time. She is identifying tumors. She's sensing like high blood pressure, and it's just like, and her approach to, I ought to be, be able to be a medical professional, despite the fact that that's women can't do that. It shows that modern mindset. She's boundary breaking. She's not someone who's just like, oh, a woman's place is in the home. Like she's defying the culture in which she inhabits. It not only emphasizes her as this outsider, not just because of her heritage and her appearance and her magical abilities, but also just like her mindset means that she doesn't fit in,
Yeah, but I think perhaps that first chapter would have benefited from having maybe a more stereotypical or traditional female to make that comparison, because now you say it, I'm like, actually you're absolutely right. She doesn't fit in that time in my head.
No.
But I'm not 100% sure that was like a point that they've gone to great efforts to get across.
I mean, Chakraborty is an American author. She's writing for a Western audience. She wants to make this central character as relatable to the intended audience of this book as possible. And it does make it more accessible. It can sometimes be when you're reading a book that's from the perspective of someone who is like, say it's set way hundreds of years in the past, and they're like, well, of course ethnic minorities are absolutely subhuman, and of course women should be in the home. It's like, well, of course these are absolutely valid opinions from that time period. Loads of people had them. It just means it makes it hard for us to like you because from our modern perspective, it's reprehensible. But by having her have this kind of slightly more modern outlook, we can relate to her a lot more. And I found that I did very quickly. I was like, I like Nahri. The one thing that I found was in conflict with her was I was constantly wanting to go to Daevabad. It's like, learn more about this world. She's like, I want to go back to my alleyway and just scrape a living. And I couldn't understand. I was like, no, go and have an adventure.
Yeah, you spent your whole first chapter saying about how you want to escape Cairo, and but the only character we really get any meaningful interaction with her in the early stages is her friend whose name I forgot. Yaqub, and he's also an outsider who doesn't have like traditional ways of thinking about things. So we don't get that contrast of her as like she's a progressive modern woman in an age that's kind of trying to push her down. But he does
did
talk
a little
about
bit.
he talks about her like finding a husband and
Exactly.
stuff, doesn't he?
Like that's what puts her in contrast to the societal norms.
Yeah.
He's like, you should marry, have kids, just become a housewife. And, by him saying that, it's like, those are the pressures. Those are the pressures she's experiencing and the stuff that she actually wants to reject.
Yeah.
That's why it makes it all the more confounding when she's just like, oh, I actually kind of wanted to go back to Cairo and live that small life. I don't want to have this adventure. It's like, no, you do. You do, and stop saying you don't, because just go with Dara and soften his heart that's filled with trauma.
Yeah. So then we have the scene in the graveyard, which introduced both Ifrit and Dara and Djinn and ghouls all at once. It was like sort of pedal on the accelerator.
Yeah. It felt a little bit overwhelming, and I also had to go back and check a little bit because the decision to have the general generic term for the Deva being Deva, there's a specific tribe of them also called Deva.
Yeah.
And
which she mentions later on.
Yeah. The arrogance of them to take their name. It's like, I don't know if clearly there was some kind of research that was being done about like there are some different aspects and different forms of Deva / Djinn in real world mythology, and that was potentially like some kind of evolution of the myth, and she's found some kind of niche thing and she's wanted to put that in as a reference, but it does make it confusing. In my recap, and I was rereading, I was just like, I'm mentioning Deva and Deva as if like when they're going into the Deva district, they're not Deva. So it was just a bit...
Yeah.
And reading the book, it's fine. I got a bit thrown off. I had to look up the differences and double check. But you could have made it easier by just giving them a slightly different name. Like the Nahid. Nahid is right there. Like have all of them be Nahid.
Yeah. Some of the back and forth where it's like introducing us to the concepts of things that we're going to have explained to us later on. And I get this must be a challenge with like, you can't do exposition necessarily in a moment of kind of high action and intensity.
I don't mind a little bit of the sizzle of the stuff we're going to learn, like when they have that and when they make reference to, the other aspects of Daevabad and Djinn culture. Like, I'm like, yeah, great. And, because we do get multiple chapters, the traveling of Nahri and Dara, where in between being chased by stuff, their chapters are essentially just exposition.
Yeah.
Like just loads of world building, oodles of it. And I really enjoyed it, but it does mean that, there's a lot to remember. And you can imagine it in a film when he's summoning the smoke in his hand or the flame into different shapes. Lovely imagery. Really like that. But I almost felt like, I was taking notes, but I felt like, any normal reader would also want to be taking notes.
Yeah. I've almost forgotten through doing this podcast like how to read a book without feeling like I have to be properly switched on and concentrating fully all the time. And I think actually like when you read books, if they're done well enough, that stuff almost sinks in by osmosis if it's threaded into the story well enough. But we did talk about in one of the Sunbringer episodes, like how to make situations involving dialogue meaningful, not boring, believable. And I actually think using the traveling on the flying carpet whilst having exposition type conversations to be quite an effective way to do that, because you're like, okay, we've got this long journey, so I'm going to explain the entire history of the Banu Nahid and Deva and Suleiman and all of this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot to be said for also giving us the sense of a journey being undertaken. And we saw this with Godkiller, the first book in that series, where, they're having these conversations as they're traveling and you can kind of picture it. You're like, oh yeah, this is exactly the stuff they would talk about while going along the way, learning about each other's history. And we get to see so much of it. It's just that, Nahri has so little. So the only option is that Dara just spurts forth loads and loads of history lessons.
Yeah.
I'm here for it. I loved it. I think the world building that S.A. Chakraborty has done so far is top notch.
Yeah.
Like the tribes of the Deva are very cool and distinct. You got different eye colors, slightly different skin tones is what I'm imagining. You got different styles of clothing, architecture and art. When they go to that central plaza in Daevabad and they have the 7 paths that run off it, like the 6, or was it 6 paths, the different ones that go to the different Deva districts, and then the one that goes to the Shafit kind of like, huts, and the different doors and the gateways that all look so wildly different. You get a sense of it. And, I love a good bunch of different people split into different houses. It's like it's not just Harry Potter. I know we're millennials and it's it's the obvious go-to one, but like I love it in manga and anime when you're like, oh, those are those kind of people and they specialize in fire magic and these guys move super fast.
You're like, serpent of the Wings of Night again, isn't it? Different vampire houses.
Oh god, yeah, exactly. Yeah. The different.
Yeah, we liked it then as well.
Perfect. I love all that stuff. I love it because it's distinct. And and of course you've got this there's also serving a not just world building purpose but a narrative purpose here, because you've got the splitting of the tribes done by Suleiman, and then you've got the fact that they have different stances on the creation of Shafit, and that's a whole political thing that's like I felt was really engaging as a kind of a very morally grey area based on how the different sides of that argument have behaved.
Yeah.
Like, what did you feel about getting involved in that? Like, would you personally fall down on one side? Like, do you support the Katanis, the Gaziri? But of course, they verge on hating the actual Deva and the Nahid, and effectively did a genocide that wiped them out. But then, of course, you feel sorry for them. But then, of course, the Deva Nahid were also like against race mixing, which is also problematic.
Yeah, yeah. This was one of the things I think that makes me want to kind of hold back on like having strong opinions on anything, because like I know we haven't really jumped into Ali yet and his side of things, but he's presented as this kind of very morally driven person, but he's actually doing
what he thinks is right.
He's doing what he thinks is right, but what he thinks is right is actually a kind of almost fundamentalist reading of his scripture and his interpretation of it. So then I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I agree with that kind of
that mindset
of that approach to it. However, the basics of that political debate, you're led very much to think, well, of course Shafiq should be treated equally and have opportunities and those kinds of things. But he's ultimately like supporting the extremist end of that movement, or that's what we're being led to believe, because I still have some doubts about the weapons that Ali was shown. There's a lot of grey area.
Displaced by cover?
Maybe or maybe not. Like, I like the fact that we've got that potentially Anas was, on the right side of the argument, but using the wrong methods. And there's a lot of that grey area. It's a classic thing, isn't it,
to create a kind of inadvertent villain.
Yeah.
But with Kaveh, I mean, like, Muntadir makes a really good point about how Kaveh is like, well, his religious zealotry, Ali's religious zealotry, would lead him to discriminate against the Deva, who he believes, because of their stances on race mixing, means they continue to punish the Shafit. And you're like, yeah, okay, that's a legitimate concern. But is Kaveh actually involved in the children smuggling? Because, of course, one of the courtesans he did hire was one of the people from Toran's tavern. So what was his involvement there? Yeah. And if he's fully aware that he's just like engaging in child slavery, then I'm not really supportive of him either.
100% coincidence.
Oh no, you're right. Yeah, probably nothing.
We'll
Silly
give him the
me.
benefit of the doubt. He hasn't acted in any way suspiciously or hostile towards our what we think is main protagonist. Well, one of our main protagonists.
I mean, going back to Ali's religious zealotry, when Ghassan was talking to him and asking him about his beliefs, and just showed him the arrow, the last arrow shot by Afshin soldiers, and he's like, "You see, it does not bend. It is powerful and it is sharp, but it does not bend." And that's what their mistake was. They weren't flexible.
Yeah.
And, when the Khitanis came in, using as a political motivation this idea that Nahids were too against Shafit, creation and interbreeding between them and humans, that was the motivation. But clearly there was something also political behind it. And while it achieved a goal, Ghassan isn't going to overnight just say like, yep, you're all equal, all get equal rights. It's just that simple, because he knows that he was like, where are we going to house them all? What are we going to do? And also we can't let them out into the real. I thought that was really interesting that, we can't let them out into the real world because they'll go and play havoc with the humans. So the Shafit are, as a result of their birth, effectively trapped within this district. And, not to put too far upon it, you can sometimes see parallels with people being trapped geographically as the result of their birth. There's some definite kind of like some parallels here that are quite interesting, and also, make it, mentally for me, I was like, yep, I can see what Chakraborty is trying to do here. It's a politically complex, sometimes morally grey situation.
Yeah, definitely. And I think she's done a really good job with Ghassan. I think in particular, we haven't had like loads of interaction with him, but I think it could have been really easy to make him almost like a caricature type of character. But actually, I don't know about you, like I've sort of warmed to him quite a bit. Obviously, our first introduction to Daevabad is Ali kind of joining up with these people who are ultimately kind of fighting against his father. And so the assumption then is that when we meet the father, he's going to be, like reasonably unlikable. But actually he seems sort of relatively tolerant, moderate.
He's a complex ruler, and I think this is often the thing with powerful figures that we see in history, is that on the day-to-day, on the familial level, they can be affable. They can be people who are, caring and kind to their family, and they can be compassionate to whole groups of society. But they're also aware that they have to make decisions that could affect negatively hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people. And he's the kind of person who will be like, yep, Anas Bat has to be crushed to death by the Karkadan. And he will do it, go, yeah, have a stomach for it. You got to stand there. You got to watch it. Like, it's why when we look back at, you look back at any ruler in history, and there's a bunch of people who say they're a great person, and there's a bunch of people point out that like, yeah, but he also slaughtered thousands in the siege of whatever it was. Yeah. Therefore, he can't be a good person. It's like, it's because we're trying to put too simple a point about whether they're good or bad on incredibly complex people who had to make huge decisions that affected so many people's lives.
Yeah.
And we're seeing one of those figures here. And I like the fact that Chakraborty has chosen to have him be attempting to find a middle ground where he's constantly displeasing everybody. And as a result of his refusal to change society, people live in squalor and effectively slavery and servitude.
Yeah, so interesting stuff.
Dara. We haven't really talked about Dara yet.
Yeah.
What do you think about him as a character?
He's probably the main thing that I'm struggling with a little bit. And largely, I think actually it's the interaction between him and Nahri, where all of a sudden there's this like,
well, maybe I have warmed to you a little bit.
I would never forgive myself if something happened to you. Like, what? Like, where's this come from? But like, yeah,
my instinct when he said that was like, oh, is it because he's warmed to her, or is it because he values her blood more than he's willing to let on. He's like, this is our route back into power.
But there's all these things about like a lingering touch and
yeah, when she's like they're riding on the horse, and she's like they're riding side by side, and she's like looking down. Maybe her eyes stayed there a little too long.
it wasn't the first time that his touch had lingered slightly longer than necessary.
I didn't realize we were reading another Romantasy.
Yeah, but again, and obviously it hasn't like developed anywhere, and maybe it won't. Albeit, I think that'd be even stranger if it didn't at this stage. But that doesn't feel like it's been particularly developed. It hasn't gone from like arguing to kind of like emotionally intense. It's just kind of like borderline hostage situation to lingering touches.
It came in way too quickly.
Yeah.
When that first reference came in, I thought, this hasn't been earned. This hasn't been earned yet. Leave it for a few more chapters, because you can see them starting to get on as they learn about each other's pasts.
Yeah.
Like she learns about his, and, she has the images of like, he's not just this stoic, grunty warrior. He's also like, he was a slave. He had a sister. Like that should be the trigger point for her realizing he's a fully rounded human being, not human being, but, a Djinn who has suffered and has been through a lot and is traumatized by what's happened to him. Like the bit where he gets potentially drowned for however long, days, weeks, months, we don't know. That should be the point, because up until that point, yes, he is almost like a captor. But when you get stuff like that should be the point. Like, she should stop seeing him as this hostile force.
Yeah. I was just about to say, I think like this point that we've just got up to with him, getting eaten and then digging his way out of the rook from the inside, like, and then him saving her life and then her saving his life afterwards. That would be potentially a catalyst moment for, your classic movie style. Like we've just had a super high adrenaline moment where both of our instincts were to rush to almost sacrifice ourselves for each other, and I hadn't realized that I'd felt this, close to you, and then and then you start the slow burn at that point.
Yeah, I wonder if this was like, again, I think I've said this with a lot with our last book, Sunbringer. I feel like it's the editor's push there to be like, bring this in a bit earlier. It comes in too late. And so she's gone back and put in like one throwaway line just to start it off, and you're like, didn't need it. So I don't want to blame the writer, I want to blame the editor.
But so just and correct me, because I keep getting these things the wrong way around. But Deva are the ones that are supposed to pretty much detest humans.
But they don't detest them. Ifrit detest humans.
Right, yeah.
Deva were the ones who saw them as humans are beneath them. And the Deva were the ones who enforced the separation between them.
That's it. They enforced the separation, not that
because they were the ruling
them.
dynasty,
Yeah,
and they were worried that if Suleiman's law wasn't upheld, that they shouldn't mix, then a new Suleiman would come along to reinforce his laws again. Yeah. And that's what they feared. They were like, if we don't do this and just stop interfering in the lives of the humans, then we'll be punished again.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. Then I think like that early sort of romance stuff, the lingering touches, is just way too soon given his worldview. And he even references it after they've had that argument towards where we finished, where he says, you have to remember, like, however old he is, presumably like, I don't know, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, whatever, like his whole mindset has been, humans are like sort of sub and beneath Deva, and like at that point, at that kind of breaking down that long held worldview, that would be an appropriate point for her to be the thing that kind of challenges his view.
We also know that he was a bit more involved in the human world than perhaps you might have expected when they're at Hierapolis, and he's like, I came here with my father and we saw a play. How much is that common for Deva to do?
And he says it was like wonderful or something.
Yeah. So
it wasn't like
human
I came
culture.
here to watch some humans in a play and they were pathetic.
They were rubbish. I
would have been much better as the lead in Hamlet.
I get the feeling that, like, you know, for his age, I feel like is that ancient Greek play? Like, what are we talking about here? Because his age is really undetermined, because he says that, you know, Suleiman was way before his time, so we know he's not 3,000 years old, but he was there for the fall of the Nahid dynasty and the arrival of the Khitanis. Seemingly he was one of those who defended the dynasty, and we know that he was a Djinn for quite a few hundred years. I get that feeling, right? Like, he's been that for quite a while. So, you know, we'll find out how, but if he was like of a normal Djinn and not cursed around the time of the Khitanis taking over, then I think that would put him at roughly, because they threw him out in, was it 1400 years ago? So, you know, he's probably like 1600 years old.
Yeah, that's kind of the basis I was working on. And but I just there's just certain things about him. I'm like, are we seeing like grumpy old man, or are we seeing like?
No, he was frighteningly beautiful, Dan.
Yeah, but like the way he acts is like, is it sulking teenager? Is it grumpy old man? Like,
he's a curmudgeon.
Yeah,
he's a curmudgeon.
He's definite curmudgeon. But yeah, I mean, I guess if it does go down the romantasy route, then we've got kind of some key elements ticked off, like inappropriate age gap and things like that.
What do you think has made him a war criminal? Because we see the flashbacks of him pulling down walls, but that was when he was controlled as a genie. You know, and slaughtering people in battle. But again, I think that was also when he, like, there were all the things that he was commanded to do against his will. Yeah, I wonder what he particularly was done. You know, like, because when the two Ifrit are binding him and throwing him under, like, who's caused that to happen? You know, there's a lot of questions about the events that we've seen and the inferences that we've read in the book that mean that he's done something really reprehensible in the past. And will it be something that when Nahri learns about it, she feels it's a step too far, or will she forgive him?
Yeah, I genuinely don't know. And he's really built it up, hasn't he? I mean, he didn't even want to take her into the city because, you know, or I guess the assumption we're getting is that that's not necessarily a safe place for him to.
Yeah, like, I'm assuming he will either, like, it will range from either people going, oh. Well, actually, if they will even recognize it, like, I doubt there'll still be wanted posters up. But when people realize who he is, whether he'll be promptly arrested or just asked to leave, and they'll be like, you're not welcome here.
Yeah, that will be, hopefully that does get explained.
When do you think Ali and Nahri will meet?
So it feels like it might happen quite soon. I guess it depends how long it takes Nahri and Dara to get to Daevabad. But if they get to Daevabad relatively soon, I would have thought she will appear on the radar of the palace relatively quickly. I mean, but then maybe that's the super straightforward way of seeing it, because obviously there's all these people that are trying to prevent that from happening. So
yeah, I don't really know what they're going to do when they get to the city. Like, will he present her to the Khitanis knowing that what might happen? Who is he going to take her straight to the David district to be like, she will be our new figurehead, you know? And they'll be like, ugh, a Shafit, get out. You know, like, what is the plan? I mean, because as far as we know, once you're in there and you're a Shafit, you're not getting out. So if they don't like her, it's not like she can get away, or whether she just have to learn how to escape this mystical city that seemingly they can't leave.
Yeah. I've been kind of working on the assumption that we're not actually that far away from from the two of them at least interacting or coming across each other for the first time. I mean, the palace seems to be setting itself up for the arrival of Nahri, doesn't it? It's kind of
with the arrival of the mural.
Yeah.
And do you think, I can't remember if it said it in the book, is the rain also going to go away, like when she arrives? Like, will the actual, it's like the whole city itself has been mourning the loss of these people. And, it's always just wet and, grey.
Yeah. It feels like the groundwork's being laid for her to arrive and that to have a big impact on like the environment within.
Like she steps through the gate and everything's just like ba-ba.
So any final points?
In terms of where this is all heading, I think all three of our main characters will survive to the end of the book.
Yeah.
Is this part of a series? Is this
there's 3 of them as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Oh yeah, book 1 of the Daevabad Trilogy. All 3 of them will survive and continue into the next book. I don't think we're going to go back to Cairo. I think we're in Daevabad for the rest of this book. I think the following book, there's going to be branching out and going somewhere else. I wouldn't be surprised if we go to one of the other cities. The Amgaziri, the Tar Intri, one of those ones, to see what the other sides of the dynasty are like, where the origins of the Khatanis or somewhere like that. I don't know if we're going to have, because Ifrit and Perry's, they can't enter Daevabad. So it might be they were a bit of world building and this is it. We're not going to see any more of that stuff again.
I was just going to ask, who do you think are kind of main antagonists?
What Kaveh, maybe?
But he seems to be sort of the obvious one being set up to try and interfere with Ali.
Everyone's motivations are so complex. Like you can even see part of Kaveh's point of view about what his fears are, just whether he's going about implementing in a bit of a skeezy way. You can disagree with that bit of it. But I don't know if it's going to be like, sometimes, but again, my issue with trilogies is that this one's going to be more of a self-contained a little bit, but that it'll end with, and of course, there's a big Ifrit who's coming, the biggest one you've ever seen, and they're really mean. And the next book is about positioning, moving around until the 3rd book where the Ifrit strikes.
Yeah.
What about you? What are your predictions?
Yeah, I don't think I'm a million miles away from that, to be honest. I think in that sort of traditional sense, trying to think of like, well, who is the antagonist that we're trying to face, and do we just have this kind of pursuit to try and kill Nahri on the journey to Daevabad to demonstrate the wider, like you were saying, world building around like the dangers and different groups of people's view towards who Nahri or what Nahri is. It feels like maybe the challenge in Daevabad will be that kind of the political unfolding of what's going on with the Shafit, the uprising, where Nahri fits into that, how Ali is going to interact with that and sort of challenge the status quo. I feel like we're both kind of settling on the enemy is prejudice. and often someone pulling the strings in politics. It could be Kaveh, maybe even Ghassan himself.
He's like, no, the stability of the city is all.
Yeah.
I will not let the city fall to chaos.
I guess we'll find out. Hopefully we'll be another third of the way through the book by the next episode. So for the next episode, we will be covering up to the end of chapter 19. And you can join us then to hear where we're up to and how things have progressed.
I'm really looking forward to this. I said this about a lot of books in the first third, but I'm really enjoying where it is so far.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it so far and looking forward to seeing where it goes. So if you want to let us know what you've enjoyed about City of Brass, what you haven't enjoyed, whether you like the characters, whether you agree or disagree with the things that we've said. You can let us know if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section below. Also, give us a like and subscribe if you can. If you just want to let us know on social media, you can do that on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook at Escapists Anonymous Pod. Just leave us a comment or send us a message, and if we think they're really interesting, then maybe we'll have a chat about them on an episode. So other than that, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that allows you to, if you want to leave us a rating and a review, that helps us out, so do go ahead and do that. But until the next time, all that's left to say is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.